For most people, silence is an absence. It is like an empty room where sound does not exist and life has stalled. People are afraid of silence. To fill it, they talk, turn on music, try to sing, and create a never-ending hum. Because to them, silence is nothingness. It is a void. However, for 10-year-old Maya, the situation was the exact opposite. Silence was not a void, but a substance. In fact, it was the sturdiest, most reliable substance in the world. For Maya, silence was an invisible but thick shield, an armor that protected her from the world's endless, exhausting, demanding, and cruel noise. For Maya, the world was not just loud, but physically painful. Sounds didn't just strike her ears, they pricked her skin like needles. The honking of cars, the static of televisions, the chatter and laughter of people. They were all a weight crushing down on her. But the heaviest weight of all was the human voice. Because the human voice made demands. It expected an answer. It judged. It questioned. It wasn't that Maya couldn't speak. Physically, her vocal cords were intact, and her lungs were strong. Sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, while everyone in the house was asleep and the world finally fell silent, she would pull her duvet over her head, making a small cave for herself. Inside that cottony darkness, she would hum songs to herself. Her voice flowed clear, clean, and pure as a mountain spring. But when the sun rose and she mixed with people, their loud voices caused a rusty, heavy lock to engage. A door deep in her mind would slam shut with a loud bang, and the key would vanish. School. School was a battlefield. For Maya, the school corridors were not a nest of education, but a front line where she tried to survive. When the recess bell rang, the hallways filled with a terrifying cacophony of shouting children, barking teachers, slamming metal locker doors, and squeaking rubber shoes. The sounds bounced off the walls, multiplied, and echoed inside Maya's head. Everyone wanted a piece of her. The classroom was even worse. When the teacher wrote a question on the board and the screeching sound of the chalk ceased, the class's attention would seek out its victim like a hunter. Maya, come to the board. Maya, do you know the answer? Maya, why don't you speak? Maya, why are you so weird? When someone asked her a question, it wasn't just a social interaction. A physical, hard knot would form in Maya's throat. It was as if words were panicked birds inside her ribcage, flapping their wings against her lungs and ribs, trying to rise, but getting stuck in that narrow, dark passage in her throat. Their fluttering hurt. She felt like she was drowning. Her breath would cut short, her cheeks would burn crimson with shame and helplessness, and the world before her eyes would blur and turn gray. She would only hear her heartbeat, a deafening sound pounding like a drum in her ears. Doctors called this selective mutism. A cold, clinical term noted in her files. An anxiety disorder. Maya, however, had found a simpler, more realistic name for it: impossibility. That is why Maya ran away. She had to. As soon as the final bell rang signaling the end of school, she didn't run to the school buses, football fields, or parks like the other children. She pulled her hood over her head, slumped her shoulders as if lost within them, made herself as small as possible, and started walking. Her route was always the same, to the edge of town, where the asphalt ended and the dirt began, to the forgotten place. It was a long walk, but for Maya, it was a purification ritual. First, she left behind the noise of the town center. Then, she passed by the old fishermen's shelters with peeling paint. Here, the air smelled of salt, algae, and dried nets. After that, she followed the railway line that had been out of use for years, its rails rusted and swallowed by weeds. Walking balanced on the rails helped her feel better and focus her mind. And finally, she arrived at that place hidden behind giant, thorny blackberry bushes. The bushes were so dense and prickly that for anyone who didn't know the secret passage, this was an impenetrable wall. Maya would slip through the thorns with the agility of a cat and reach her sanctuary. The greenhouse. Once, perhaps 100 years ago, this was a glass palace where a lord grew exotic plants. It was an engineering marvel bearing the elegance of the Victorian era, with ironwork and massive domes. Now, it was a ruin reclaimed by nature. Its iron ribs had rusted, turning reddish-brown. Half of its glass panels had fallen, creating a dangerous, shimmering carpet on the ground. The plants inside were no longer potted plants. They were wild, dangerous, uncontrolled, and free. But for Maya, this was the safest place in the world, because silence was good for her here. This was not a ruin, but a temple. The moment she stepped inside, the atmosphere changed. The windy, salty, and cold air outside gave way to a warm, humid, and heavy stillness. Inside, it smelled of wet earth, decaying leaves, and old rain. This scent calmed Maya. This was the home of silence. Here, no one expected her to speak. Far from human voices, giant ferns didn't ask her questions. Moss-covered statues didn't expect an answer. Spiders spinning webs in the corners didn't judge her peculiarity. Maya would drop her backpack onto the soft, velvety moss on the ground. She would kneel and, with the seriousness of worship, take out her most precious treasures, her paints. Acrylic paints with crushed tubes and caps covered in color. Brushes with shedding bristles. And a jar of cloudy water. Most painters look for a canvas. They look for smooth paper. They look for paint. Maya sought the light. She would choose one of the remaining intact glass panels. Usually not the cleanest one, but the one where the sunlight hit most beautifully, or the one that framed the landscape behind it most interestingly. She would wipe the aged dust and dirt from the glass with an old cloth she pulled from her pocket. When the transparency of the glass was revealed, she would take a deep breath. And then, the magic would begin for her. She would dip her brush into the paint. Into the deepest shade of blue. A blue as dark as the bottom of the ocean, as silent as the middle of the night. And she would apply it to the glass, covering the gray, gloomy sky outside. The soft glide of the brush on the glass, that feeling of relief, would untangle the knots in Maya's soul. Maya didn't paint the world as it was. She wasn't interested in realism, because reality was harsh, gray, and noisy. She painted the world as it should be. Is there a dead, dried tree outside behind the glass, its branches reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers? Maya would move to align with that tree on the glass and dress it in emerald green leaves. She would draw golden owls perched on its branches and purple wisteria hanging from its trunk. Is the sky outside cloudy and gloomy? Maya would draw pink and blue clouds on the glass, and flying whales radiating light from within. The real world behind the glass and the painted world on the glass would overlap. This was an optical illusion, a forced perspective. Maya was repairing reality. Silently. With brush strokes. She was fixing everything broken, ugly, and missing with the power of colors. That day, she was working on a dragon. This wasn't one of those terrible, fire-breathing monsters from fairy tales. This was a guardian. It was a dragon with scales made of silver and liquid light, wings transparent and colorful like stained glass. Maya had taken her finest brush and was painting the dragon's eye. A small, delicate detail. A dot of pure amber. She held her breath. Her hand didn't tremble. The world was perfect. And it was beautiful. The world was silent. For that moment. Until that sound was heard. First, she heard the laughter. That cruel, disturbing, familiar, loud laughter. Maya's hand froze in midair. Her heart began to beat in her throat. She felt as if a cold stone had settled in her stomach. At the entrance of the greenhouse, 3 shadows appeared, cutting the light. Lucas and his friends. The kings of the school. Or those who thought themselves kings. Lucas, that boy who always spoke loudly, thought he was big and always right, trying to fill the massive void inside himself by breaking and crushing others. Even his walk carried a threat. They entered. Their heavy boots mercilessly crushed the centuries-old mossy floor. "Well, well," said Lucas. His voice echoed off the glass walls of the greenhouse, scratching like a curse uttered in a holy place. "Look who's here! Maya! Our little mute!" Maya recoiled. Her back hit a cold, rusty metal pole. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to blend into the colors like a chameleon and disappear, to seep into the soil on the ground. But Lucas had seen her. And worse. Lucas had seen her painting. The boys approached the dragon. The silver scales shone in the afternoon sun, shimmering as if the creature were breathing. For a moment, just for a moment, the mocking mask on Lucas's face fell away. An expression of pure admiration appeared in his eyes. Because the painting was beautiful. Undeniably, breathtakingly beautiful. Lucas made a move as if to reach out and touch it. But his friends were behind him. The audience expected a performance. Lucas couldn't look soft. He couldn't like the weird girl's art. Because that would stain his kingdom. He would be humiliated. "This is our place," Lucas said, his voice hardening. He became even crueler to cover up his own admiration. "And you are polluting it. You're drawing on the windows like a baby." He picked up something from the ground. A heavy, sharp-edged gray stone. The birds inside Maya were screaming. "Don't," she begged inwardly. Asterisk, please don't. That's not just paint. That's my friend. That dragon is my voice. If you destroy it, you destroy me too. Asterisk, she wanted to raise her hand, to say stop. She wanted to open her mouth and let out a scream that would shake the glass of the greenhouse. But that damned lock was there again. Her throat was sealed with concrete. She couldn't make a single sound. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice couldn't escape. Lucas weighed the stone in his hand. He looked into Maya's eyes. There wasn't pure evil in his eyes, but rather a challenge. A need to prove his own power. A look that said, "Can you stop me?" Maya couldn't stop him. Lucas pulled his arm back and swung. The sound was like the end of the world. The dragon, shattered. The silver wings, the amber eye, the light-emitting scales. They all turned into thousands of sharp shards, a deadly rain. The shattering of the glass, the spilling of pieces onto the ground took seconds, but for Maya, this moment felt like an eternity. Her safe world rained down at her feet. Lucas laughed. But this time his laugh was a bit nervous. The extent of the destruction he caused, the violence of the sound, had startled even him. "Let's go," he said to his friends, without looking at Maya again. "We're done here." They ran away, taking their noise with them. Only Maya remained. And that glistening wreckage on the ground. Maya had fallen to her knees among the wet moss and glass shards. She saw her own reflection among the broken pieces of glass. Her shattered face. Her scattered soul. But she didn't cry. Crying required a voice, a release. She simply gathered her paints with trembling hands. She stuffed the tubes into her bag. That day, as she left the greenhouse, she decided something. She would never paint again. And she would never return to that greenhouse. The world had won. The noise had won. Silence had been defeated. For the following 3 days, the sky wept for Maya. A gray, cold, unending rain fell upon the town. Maya didn't leave her room. She looked out her window at the gray world outside, at that soulless, colorless landscape. She didn't even have glass to paint. She had no world that could be fixed. That desire to create inside her had given way to a deep void. But the human spirit is strange. Especially the spirit of an artist. Even if wounded and scarred, it wants to return to where it belongs. Hands want to produce, eyes seek the beautiful. On the 4th day, the rain had stopped. The sun peeked shyly through the clouds. Maya, unable to stop herself, had let her feet take her there. "I'll just go and look," she told herself. "I'll just get that one brush I forgot." She passed through the bushes. She approached the greenhouse. She prepared herself to see the glass shards on the ground, the corpse of her dragon. She would face that painful sight. But when she entered, her breath caught. The floor was clean. Not a single shard of glass remained. It had all been swept away. And that terrible hole in the wall had been covered. Not with new glass, that would be too expensive, but with thick, transparent plastic sheeting. The plastic was stretched tight, its edges carefully taped layer by layer, reinforced so the wind wouldn't get in. "You used too much blue," The voice came from the shadows. A creaky, old voice like a rusty hinge. Maya startled, dropping her bag from her hand. In the darkest corner of the greenhouse, an old man was sitting on an overturned old paint bucket. This was Mr. Silas, the legend of the town. The old recluse whom children feared and made up stories about. The man they called the madman, the witch, or the ghost. His face was full of deep lines like a dried riverbed. He wore an old, patched coat that looked like it was made of earth and time. His hands were gnarled, and he was holding a broom. Mr. Silas couldn't look at Maya, because his eyes were milky blue. Cloudy. Misty. He was half blind. He saw the world only as shadows and beams of light. "Didn't you hear?" the old man said, his voice like pebbles. "I said you use too much blue. Dragons aren't just silver and blue. They are cold creatures, they need fire. They need a little golden yellow too, to make the fire felt." Maya stood frozen. She wanted to run. But there was no threat in the man's voice, only lived experience. Mr. Silas tapped his cane on the ground. "I heard that glass break," he said, his voice softer now. "I heard those jackals laughing too. I couldn't come fast enough." He turned his face in Maya's direction, but couldn't focus. "I was a painter too, you know. Little girl? Before my eyes left me. Before my hands started trembling like leaves in the wind." He raised his trembling hand, holding it up to the light. "I can't hold a brush anymore. I can't distinguish colors on my palette. My world is just smoke. Gray, endless smoke." He reached into his pocket. He pulled something out. Maya's blue-handled brush. Saved from the wreckage. "But I saw your dragon. Before they broke it. I saw it, even if blurred. It was so bright, so vivid, that it pierced right through my smoke. It was the first clear and bright thing I've seen in 10 years. He extended the brush towards Maya. "The world is ugly and breathless, child. Broken. And very loud. It needs people like us to paint over the cracks." He paused for a moment. "So? What are you going to do? Are you just going to watch and let those jackals win? Or are you going to finish that dragon's tail?" Maya stepped forward and took the brush. And that day, neither Mr. Silas nor Maya spoke. They spoke by doing their work. They just painted. From that day on, the greenhouse became not just a silent shelter, but a studio. A shelter for two. They formed a strange partnership. An old man who couldn't see and a little girl who couldn't speak. And Mr. Silas would describe the colors in his memory. He painted with his words. "Give me the sunset, girl. But not just ordinary orange. You know that purplish red that remains on the edges of clouds after a storm? That one. I want that sadness, that resentment." Maya would mix the colors and apply them to the glass. Mr. Silas would sit under the sun, feeling which color was where by the way the light passed through the glass and hit his skin, by its warmth. "Here is green," he would say, gesturing at the air with his hand. "The coolness of the forest is coming from there." Together they created forests. Oceans. Vines climbing to the sky. They even painted on the plastic-covered window. The greenhouse was no longer a ruin. It had become a beautiful temple that sang and breathed with light and color. But in every beautiful story, the hero must pass a final test. A week later, the sky darkened. A heavy, electrically charged storm was gathering on the horizon. And Lucas returned. This time he wasn't alone. There were 5 more kids behind him. A gang. And they had more stones in their hands. Bigger stones. They stood outside the greenhouse. The wind carried their voices. "Hey! Mole! We know you're in there. Today we're going to level this place. Not a single piece of glass will remain." Inside, Mr. Silas struggled to his feet. His joints cracked. He gripped his cane like a sword. "You stay here," he said to Maya. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from anger. "I'll talk to them. I'll scare them off." Mr. Silas headed for the door. With his old, fragile body, he was going to stand against an army. Maya looked at him. She looked at his trembling hands. Then at the angry faces behind the plastic. Something clicked into place inside Maya. The lock didn't close, on the contrary, it broke. She moved. She stepped in front of Mr. Silas. And she opened that door which had been locked for years, for just one word. With a rusty and used voice. No! The voice was small. It was frail. But it was there. Mr. Silas froze. Maya pushed the door and stepped out. Into the wind. Into the heart of the noise. Lucas was standing there with a stone in his hand. Get out of the way, freak! Or I'll paint you too! He shouted, but there was hesitation in his voice. He hadn't expected Maya to come out. Maya was afraid. Her knees were shaking so much she thought she would fall. Her heart felt like it would burst out of her chest. But she didn't run. She didn't walk towards Lucas. She walked towards the large, intact glass pane right next to Lucas, facing the road. She turned her back to Lucas. She was defenseless. She dipped her brush into her brightest red. Then into white. And she began to paint on the glass Lucas was about to stone. Lucas was surprised. What are you doing? I'm going to break that. Maya didn't stop at all. She painted rapidly, feverishly. Not with anger, but with a strange, aggressive tenderness. Do you know who she painted? Lucas. But not that cruel boy with a stone in his hand. She painted the boy without that mask of false strength on his face. She painted the boy who looked at the dragon with admiration a week ago. A Lucas with soft eyes and a calm stance. A Lucas holding a bird, not a stone. She painted the potential Lucas kept hidden deep down, that he showed to no one. She finished and stepped aside. Lucas looked at the glass. He saw his own reflection in the glass, an angry face, stone in hand, turned ugly. And over that reflection lay the picture Maya had painted. The good Lucas. Two images overlapped. Reality and possibility. Maya had held a mirror up to him. But not a mirror that judged him, a mirror that showed him who he could be. The wind howled. The other kids went silent. Everyone was looking at that stone. Lucas looked at the glass, at his own face. Then at Maya's paint-stained hands. He swallowed. The hard lump in his throat rose and fell. The stone in his hand grew heavy. Unbearably heavy. And he loosened his fingers. Thud, the stone fell onto the soft grass. It broke nothing. Lucas said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. He just lowered his head slightly. It was a gesture of respect, or perhaps shame. He turned his back. Leave it, he said to his friends. His voice was hoarse. And he walked away. That night the storm broke. Wind and rain battered the greenhouse. But the glass didn't break. When the sun rose the next morning, the townspeople woke up to a miracle. The sunlight passed through the greenhouse and hit Maya's paintings. Since the sun was low, these paintings were projected outside, onto the street, onto the asphalt. Massive beams of vibrant colored light spilled into the town. Forests, dragons, and oceans danced upon the gray asphalt. The ruined greenhouse was like a giant jewelry box glowing in the middle of weeds. Inside, Mr. Silas sat on his bucket. He bathed in the red, blue, and golden lights hitting him. I see it, whispered the old man, tears streaming from his eyes. The light is so beautiful, clear, and bright that I can feel the colors, Maya. I can see the heat, the cold, and the peace now. Maya sat beside him. She placed her small hand over the old man's calloused, trembling hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her voice was everywhere. In the green of the trees. In the blue of the sky. And in the silent mercy of Lucas, who moved a wounded bird aside on his way to school that morning. Maya learned something very important that day. Silence is not a void. Silence is a canvas. And if you are brave enough, you can paint it with such colors that you can soften stony hearts, open blind eyes, and change the world. Sometimes, the most powerful, most resonant voice in the room is the voice that doesn't say a single word.